Hello. You are listening to the Grieving Parents Sharing Hope podcast. We are here to walk with parents on their unwanted journey of child loss, guiding them to a place of hope, light, and purpose, not in spite of their child's death, but as a way to honor his or her life. And now, here is your host, author, speaker, and bereaved parent, Laura Diehl.
Hi, today you are going to hear from a new friend of mine, Kim Peacock. Kim is the author of the book, Victorious Heart, which details her handling of grief over the loss of her 17-year-old daughter. It also provides insightful advice for those seeking to support and help those who grieve. She's raised 6 children, residing with her husband Larry in Mount Juliet, Tennessee. Kim is the CFO of Peacock Engineering, which is a cemetery construction company that specializes in cemetery improvement and expansion. Through her blog, Wild Victorious Heart, and her book and speaking, Kim acts as a grief mentor to others in need. She enjoys spending time with her several grandchildren, gardening, and playing with the animals on her mini farm. I am really looking forward to letting you hear our conversation, so here it is. Well, hi, Kim. I am so glad to have you join me today. We have never met formally, but I do feel like we're kindred spirits after reading your book, Victorious Heart. And there are so many directions we could go today. But first of all, just thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me. I so appreciate it. And I agree. I feel like we're kindred spirits already, even though we haven't met face to face.
Yeah, and we were driving through Tennessee on our way back to Wisconsin, and I tried to contact you because it was like I found your book, and it was like, she's in Tennessee, maybe we can meet up. And we had like a 2-day window, and it just didn't work for either one of us. So
maybe next time.
I was gonna say, I have a feeling we'll make it happen.
Yes. Yeah.
Today, we're going to try to stick to the topic because, like I said, after reading your book, there are just so many things that we could talk about. But I want to try to stick to the topic of when it seems like no one cares anymore about our child who's no longer here. And that's going to include some of the typical things that go on during this time of year that can be triggers for us, like graduation parties, Mother's Day. Now we're recording this. Mother's Day is coming up. When people hear this, Mother's Day will have just passed, which means the listeners can breathe a sigh of relief. Mother's Day is over for another year. But before we dig in, Kim, would you please share Nicole with us and how you lost her from this earth? Tell us your and her story, please.
Okay. And I agree. Such a sensitive time of year. And so it's a raw time. And we have a blended family. We're kind of a unique blend of all kinds of. My husband had a daughter from his previous marriage. I had Nicole from my previous marriage. And we had a daughter, Megan, biologically. She's our only biological daughter. And then we had, at the time of Nicole's passing, we had a son from Russia. And so that was the extent of our family. And Nicole was our oldest, and we were on a family vacation at Pismo Beach, California. It's really a fun place to like camp on the beach. And then you can take off-roading things, quads or ATCs, motorcycles out on the sand dunes. And we were out enjoying the sand dunes as a family, the sunshine. It was just one of those beautiful days that you just want to kind of take a snapshot and remember the sunshine and the laughter and the fun. But in an instant, everything changed for us. We were watching everyone ride around, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw a 3-wheeler ride off at a high rate of speed off of a sand dune and head straight towards the bottom. It took me a few seconds to realize that that was our daughter, Nicole. And time seemed to stop as I watched her fall and land at the bottom with the ATC on top of her. My husband and his dad got to her first. I was quite a ways away, and they pulled her helmet off. And I don't remember a ton about that day because of just the trauma of it.
Right.
But I do remember my husband holding Nicole in his arms, and she was unresponsive. And I can remember the look on his face and just the terror that we all were trying to absorb. So they ended up putting Nicole in the back of the truck, and he began doing CPR on her. Because we were so far away from the beach, the ambulance couldn't get out to us. So they had to take Nicole in the truck up to the beach to meet the paramedics.
Mm.
And snapshots of that day of getting to the beach and the paramedics working on her, getting her in the ambulance, getting her to the hospital. Those are all things that are just hard for me to remember and hard for me to take in. But it's one of those things that I have to remember, because I believe God was with us through each one of those horrible, traumatic steps. I believe there were angels surrounding us through each one of those steps. We eventually did get her to the hospital, and they ushered us into the waiting room. And as we were waiting, we gathered around as a family just praying. And the doctor came in and very bluntly said, basically, she died at the beach. And to hear those words, they were like daggers that kind of hung in the air. And then they just started falling into my heart, because that was the worst thing that I could ever imagine happening.
Right.
And, as a parent, as well, it's one of those things that we feel like we're not going to survive. And after that, we had to proceed taking those hard steps to figure out how to put our lives back together and how to put our family on solid ground, because it was as if we were all sliding into a pit of despair and just horrible heartbreak.
Yeah, and this was a situation where you were all there and you all saw it, and you all saw her in that kind of a state. I mean, that's like major PTSD for the entire family. I can't even imagine that. Now, this was like 3 days after Christmas, right? Yeah. So, I mean, that puts a damper on Christmas pretty much for the rest of your life. I mean, how can it not? I mean, you have to make choices and force yourself, but we all know the time leading up to those dates and things. And how old was she?
She was 17.
Okay. And when was this?
This was in 1998. So it was in years time, a long time ago, but honestly, it feels like yesterday. For us, it's such a strange paradox, because it's so far away, but yet it's so near always. And like you said, Christmas, it has changed the dynamic of our family and changed and actually now, all these years later, we can see beautiful things coming from those hard days. You feel like you're this broken pile of mess that you're never going to, like, how are we ever going to have Mother's Day, Christmas, birthdays? How are you going to ever be able to even walk through those days? But now in hindsight, I can see where God has put those broken pieces together, and there is beauty and there's healing in it. At the time, you feel like there's never going to be healing.
Right.
But there is.
Now, I'm not a math person, but in my head, so it'll be 25 years this year. Oh,
yeah.
My goodness. That just, that brings me to tears.
Yeah. I really, and I appreciate that. I mean, you definitely understand that, because at the time, I remember looking at people who had lost children, maybe 5 years, 10 years. And I remember thinking, okay, if they can do this, I can do this. But I couldn't imagine, at the time I was in my 40s or close to 40. And I couldn't imagine living another 40 years thinking, okay, maybe, you're going to live to 80. I thought, there is no way. There is no way that I can do that. And now I look back and I marvel that there is a way. And and I mean, really, that's an important thing for anyone listening to this, whatever stage that they're in, that they understand you are going to make it. You're going to not only, I believe in most cases, not only survive, but God is going to bring beauty in your pain. And that's important to realize, because it does not feel, all these years later,
absolutely impossible.
100%.
I mean, you don't even think you're going to get out of the darkness, much less God. It's like, how is it even possible for God to bring beauty from something this horrible? And
Mm-hmm.
I remember, a lot of my listeners already know this, but I remember that was one of those turning points for me. I talk a lot about perspective and how God has so graciously in this journey done things to change my perspective to help me get through it and to help me get to that place where life has meaning and purpose again. Because that was one of those things I would think about being without Becca for a year or 5 years or 10 years or 20 years. And it was like panic attacks. Like I couldn't even hardly breathe. It just paralyzed me.
Mm-hmm.
And one time God spoke to my heart and said, Laura, you are not getting further and further away from Becca. Every day you're getting closer to
I
seeing her
love that.
again.
Mm.
And, I've heard other parents talk about that since then, but God spoke that directly to my heart. And that was a perspective change for me. If I can, instead of seeing myself getting further and further away from her every day, I'm getting closer to seeing her again. I'm getting closer to her, not
Mm-hmm.
further away from her.
I
So
love
that's just
that.
one of those things.
That's really beautiful. And when I read or I heard you say it or I read it from you, I thought that is such a beautiful eternal perspective.
Yes.
Because scripture talks about how in Corinthians talks about how we don't look to what we see because what we see
Mhm.
is temporary, but what we don't see is the eternal. All of that stuff, there's so much more, but being able to shift that perspective, I love that you say that because it really is, it's part of the healing and the process that God uses to bring that beauty.
Right. And when we talk about healing, we're not talking about, you've already said, we stay broken.
Yes.
And we
Yeah.
stay broken. So when we
Yes.
talk about healing, we're talking about getting to the point where you can function again and
Mm-hmm.
getting to the point where you can, you know, get beyond just functioning, where life can actually become good again. And
Mm-hmm.
so, just to clarify, if anybody, it's like healing, whatever. No,
Yeah.
we're not talking about that kind of a healing.
Mm-mm.
So now, as Kim and I talk, I am going to be asking her some questions that may seem to have obvious answers. And I'll say it drives me nuts when I hear like a reporter asking a question. It's kind of like, what does it feel like to win the Super Bowl? It's like, duh, what a stupid question.
Yeah.
But I really think it's important for us to hear Kim say things that we all feel and think, because some of you need that validation and you need to know that it's okay and even normal to feel and think these things, especially when the people around you don't understand it at all. And they try to tell you that there's something wrong with you for
Mm-hmm.
feeling that way or thinking that way or still struggling or whatever. So, Kim, let me ask you, do you remember what it was like to feel like the world was going on and yours had come to a screeching halt?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. And I know it does feel like a no-brainer, but it is so important just to piggyback on what you said, that people understand that these are normal feelings.
Yes.
And I remember thinking, even as far as just the going to the grocery store, I could see people moving along, laughing, going about their daily work. And it just felt so strange because I thought, wait, don't you understand? My world has changed. My
Mm-hmm.
world is never going to be the same. So even just in the simple things of people moving on, it felt absurd to me.
Mm-hmm.
But then even to move on a little bit further, Nicole was a senior when she went to heaven, a senior in high school.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the year her friends graduated high school. And I remember the following May, after she went to heaven, it was her birthday month because May is her birthday month,
Mm-hmm.
and all of her peers were graduating. And it just they were all gracious and wonderful to me, but it still felt wrong to see everyone else. They were graduating, eventually getting married, different things. Those things just felt like it couldn't even happen. Like, how could the world go on when Nicole was not with us anymore?
Yeah.
Because my world felt like it stopped.
Yes. I want to go into that a little bit more, but a couple of things you said just made me think of a couple of things for me. I remember sometimes, you get into those places publicly where you don't want to go for a long time, and then eventually you do, and there's a trigger. It could be something that you go to reach for to buy for your child, and now it's all of a sudden you realize I I don't need to put that in my cart. And it's like, you just fall apart and you have to decide, do I walk through the store crying? Do I just leave the cart here and walk out and let the ice cream melt in the cart and hope a worker finds it? And I remember
Yeah.
thinking, how come there aren't more people crying in the store? You know?
Yeah, because we know grief, we know sorrow
Yeah.
is and loss. And that also makes you kind of think when we go to the store now to be more cognizant of other
Mm-hmm.
people, of what pain we do not know what someone else might be struggling with in
Right.
the store or in traffic or
Mm-hmm.
whatever, the drive-through line, whatever those things are, we don't know what people are struggling with because
Right.
that's how it feels. I can't tell you, even like buying Nicole's favorite food or a
Mm-hmm.
song would come on,
Mm-hmm.
you
Yes.
know, on the, on the speaker at the grocery store or, any of those things are
Yeah, for me, a
triggers.
trigger was hearing a wheelchair because in the last couple of years, Becca would shop in a wheelchair cart because
Mm,
of her one leg and her heart issues. And so
mhm,
just hearing a wheelchair cart would just,
mhm.
I'd freeze.
Yeah. Yeah, those things, our bodies are, we're whole people. God created us as a whole people using all of our senses. And the senses are a beautiful thing, but also those senses open up to our hearts and the struggles and the sorrow and like you said, even the PTSD, something as simple as
Yes.
the squeak, that
Mm-hmm.
sound coming to your ear can just take you right back to those moments.
Yeah.
And those are
Yeah.
very real things that our bodies experience, our emotions experience.
Yes. Yes. And I remember that was another thing that God used to give me a change in my perspective was the whole thing about seeing everybody go on with life. I was sitting at a stoplight. I remember that moment. And people were walking on the sidewalk and the traffic, was going past that had the green light. And
Hmm.
I'm sitting here thinking everybody's acting like life is normal.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's not. And then
No.
I realized, I wonder how many people of these have faced, I mean, maybe even the death of their own child.
Right.
And
Right.
their life looks normal now. So maybe it is
Hmm.
possible.
Hmm. Yeah. And that is a really good point to be able to look because grief is kind of isolating and
Yes.
you can feel like you are the only one feeling that. And that's a great point because we are connected and there are so many people that struggle with, loss. Maybe they lost their child, maybe they lost a spouse or a parent. And those things they're walking through and to us they might look like, oh, they're just normal, everything's
Hmm.
okay, but we don't know what they're struggling with, so
Right.
that's important to know we
We
are
don't
not
know it took
alone.
them 10 years to be able to laugh like you see them laughing right now.
Right, exactly,
Uh-huh.
exactly, because those kind of things, to laugh, to be, even to be able to smile, to listen to music, those are milestones for someone in sorrow.
Yes.
To be
Yes.
able to, even get out of bed is a
Hmm.
milestone, but we may not see that in their public journey.
Right. Exactly. Good point. Now, I know that many of our listeners lost a child who was in high school. And like you just mentioned, they hit graduation season when that loss is still extremely deep and raw. And you said Nicole died in her senior year. Now, if I remember right in the book, did you say that her senior picture showed up after she died?
Not her senior picture, but her cap and gown.
Okay, that's what it was.
Those,
Yes.
yeah. And the school we were involved in was so gracious to us. We were blessed to have, it was a small school, but they decided to honor Nicole at graduation. And that was beautiful, but it was very difficult. So we went to what would be her graduation, and the school put her cap and gown on a chair. So we
Mm.
had a visual of where Nicole would be. It was
Did you
such a
cry
one.
through the whole thing, or were
Oh,
you?
I was a mess. I almost turned around several
I
times and
I
not.
cried through my granddaughter's graduation, which was Becca's daughter, and we were watching
Yeah,
it on Zoom, and it was like I can't imagine.
yeah.
That was the child of my child. I can't imagine missing
Mhm.
out on. Wow.
Yeah, it was a strange sensation. And again, everyone was gracious to us, but I almost felt sorry for them towards the end as everybody was hugging and getting ready to go to parties and different things. And I could see the tension in their hearts. They were celebrating their child, but mourning our child. And it was
Mm,
something that was difficult. I'm very glad that we went, but I really felt like I was not going to be able to stay through the whole thing. Um, Graciously, the Lord just put his hand on us and covered us, but it was difficult. And then graduations after that, when Nicole's sister Lisa graduated high school just a
mhm.
year later, same
Yeah.
auditorium,
Mm,
same school, and then her peers after that. It's a hard thing, and that is part of the problem, or it's not a problem, but it's just the reality of this time
right.
of year, because you will be getting graduation announcements, especially if it was a high schooler. If your child was a high schooler when they went to heaven, you might be getting, graduation announcements or seeing things on social
Or it could be
media.
the opposite. It could be you're not getting any
That's
because
true.
people don't want to send them to you because they don't want to hurt you.
Yeah. And that's a good point too, because people don't know what to do. And
Right.
so they almost feel like if I send these, it's going to cause more pain. But then if they don't send them, you feel more
Yeah,
isolated. It's such a there is no right or wrong answer.
exactly. That is
Um,
exactly right.
yeah, I am thankful, even though they were painful. I'm thankful for those people who were still brave enough to send us things. They would usually write a note, thinking of Nicole, sending us
Yes.
those kind of things. I do appreciate the invitations despite the pain. Now, I
Hmm.
might be that might just be me. Other
Right.
people may not react, but I needed to feel like, okay, I'm not alone in this world.
Hmm.
And because again, sorrow is so isolating.
Yeah. And I know in your book you said I couldn't imagine attending, but I couldn't stand the thought of not attending.
Yes,
And so I think anyone who's listening who finds yourself in that place, whatever you decide for you is the right decision for you. And then I
completely
think
agree.
you have to try not to regret it down the road
Hmm.
because
Hmm.
I think either way, you could beat yourself up for feeling like you made the wrong decision at that moment, but it was
Hmm.
the right decision for you at that moment.
Very, very true. Because everybody is individual, and not only are we completely individual as humans, but even every day, every moment, like you said, you made the right decision for you in that moment.
Hmm.
And I would agree with you. I would encourage anyone, don't regret if you don't go, and don't feel bad if you do go and you need to leave. You do
Right.
whatever you need to do, because it's all, there is no right or wrong in the grief journey. Grief is such a messy, complicated process that we are all just going through it the best we can. And that's okay.
Right. And a
That's
lot,
completely okay.
especially at the beginning, you're just in survival mode.
100,
Uh,
yes.
And
Yeah.
it doesn't matter if other people understand it or not. And
Mm-mm.
that's one reason why, Kim has written her book. I've written my books. I do this podcast so that you can hear from those of us who have been there and we understand, we
Mm-hmm.
get it. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's okay, even if other
Mm-hmm.
people around you don't understand, we get it.
Mm-mm.
And we're
Yes.
behind you, whatever that decision is.
Yes.
And it's going to be a painful time, no matter when our child died, whether it was in their senior year, or I think of those who have lost younger children. And
Mm-hmm.
it's every milestone along the way. And that includes, high school graduation when they hit that point. It's going to be
Mm-hmm.
hard. It may not be quite as raw as someone like you who lost your daughter in that senior year, but it's still going to be hard.
It is. It's this thing. I feel like at least I got to experience Nicole those years, those 17 years. Maybe someone who lost a child or a baby, they may be grieving what they didn't get to experience. But you cannot compare grief. And I
Right.
think that's one thing that people need to understand. You cannot compare grief, and you cannot put expectations on a grieving person by saying, well, aren't you over this, or you should be able to, or you
Hmm.
should this. You do not know what that person's going through, and like you said, it could be just survival, just for them getting out of bed, just for them even being able to eventually go back to work or whatever their lives look like. Those are conquering steps for them.
Yes. Yes. And I just had the thought while you were talking, like parents who lost their child maybe in kindergarten or something, and now their child has been gone all these years, 12 years, and there is no cap and gown for them. There is no empty chair for them. So that can be even more devastating
Mm-hmm,
because you feel like people are forgetting my child. My child
mm-hmm,
should be graduating and it's not being recognized.
mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
so, I just want to say our hearts are with you. If that's you
Yes.
this year, our hearts are with you. We'll miss your child with you. We
Yes.
understand,
Mm-hmm.
we get it. So let's move forward just a little bit. I have something from your book. You said, I have found embracing each passing, graduation, wedding, and birth doesn't have to take away from Nicole's memory. So, we've been hitting on graduation, but you also touched on, weddings, those kinds of things. So what did you mean by that these things don't have to take away from Nicole's memory?
I learned that I could celebrate with Nicole's peers, but also miss Nicole and celebrate the days that I had with her. So it can be both. I think sometimes you feel like if you move on to going to graduations or weddings, you feel like you're leaving your child or your loved one behind.
Right.
Oh, like I'm forgetting them, but you can do both. This is just an example. One of Nicole's very good friends, Mandy, got married. And that was a hard one to go to. And Mandy's mom struggled with inviting us to the wedding
Mm,
because she didn't want, just like you talked about, she didn't want to hurt us, but she sure didn't want to leave us out because
mhm,
Nicole and Mandy were, two peas in a pod growing up. So Nicole would have been in that wedding.
mhm.
And so her mom graciously invited us, but also expressed that communication. I am so sorry. I want you to come, but you have no pressure. She wanted to make sure.
That's
So it was
wonderful.
beautiful. And it was outside, which for me is so freeing because I love to be outside. So the wedding was outside. And I remember going and I ended up having to go by myself. I can't remember why my husband wasn't able to go. I think he was out of town at work, but I went by myself and I sat on the aisle and I remember thinking, okay, you can do this. You
Mm,
can do this. Almost as if Nicole, and I don't believe Nicole speaks to me directly, but her spirit, the way she lived her life, I'll say it that
yes.
way, speaks to me. Because
Hmm.
Nicole would do whatever she could to help someone else feel good. She would be there. So I remember kind of sitting there thinking about that and then picturing, okay, if Nicole were here, she would be in this wedding and kind of picturing, I knew what the girls' dresses looked like and kind of picturing that. And I believe the Lord sent me a butterfly because butterflies are
Mm,
kind of,
yes.
because of the beautiful metamorphosis
Yes.
that happens. A butterfly literally flew up the aisle and the
Oh,
wedding hadn't started yet, but it came flittering up the aisle towards the front. And that's was so wonderful because I felt like the Lord was sending me.
yes.
You talked about perspective. Remember perspective. Nicole is more alive than you are,
Hmm.
and she may not be here physically,
Hmm.
but I am honoring her memory with that beautiful
Yes.
butterfly. And Nicole's life impacted those people there. So I
Hmm.
could celebrate her, I could remember her and honor her memory while still celebrating Mandy. And it was one of those visuals. The Lord is so good to me because I do tend to think in pictures and he
Yes.
sent that to me. So I think we can do both. And it's not all of a sudden, all at once, but there will be moments that will just kind of propel you into that with clarity into
Mm,
maybe, okay, this I can celebrate having that eternal perspective.
right. And I really appreciate how you did not believe that was Nicole
Yeah,
as that
yeah,
butterfly. It was a kiss from God, I believe,
hundred
sending
percent.
that butterfly, down that path for you, just from
Yeah.
a kiss from him, saying, I
Mhm.
know, I understand. And, she is with you in your heart and with everyone here. And,
Mhm.
And I think of the fact that we're spirit beings. God is a spirit. Our children are now fully spirit.
Mm-hmm.
So we are still connected spirit to spirit to
Mm-hmm.
our children through
Mm-hmm.
God's spirit. So
Yes. Yeah.
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 And I like to tell bereavers when those bittersweet moments come to acknowledge the bitter, but do your best to lean into the sweet.
That's perfectly said. That's beautiful because we think as humans, we think it's either or. We
Right.
think joy or sorrow, bitter or sweet, but
Hmm.
they walk
They
alongside.
coexist.
Yeah, they have to coexist. And that's what brings depth to our lives. That's also what brings beauty back to our lives, especially during this tender season of Mother's Day, graduations, yeah, a lot of weddings are in May.
Yes.
It really, those are the things we can have it both,
Hmm.
beauty and sorrow, joy
Yeah.
and sorrow.
Yeah. So it's learning to look at the positives and the blessings that help us to embrace the blessings that come with the changes that are
Hmm.
going to happen. The
Hmm.
good and the bad changes that bring the joy and the sorrow, like you said.
Hmm.
You and I have experienced so many of the same things. We've had younger children that have passed their sister's forever age. That's rough.
Yes.
Daughters knowing that they were going to get married without their sister, who would have been their maid of honor. The death of a parent that intensified or triggered the grief of missing our child. I know
Hmm.
I wailed at my dad's casket like I
Hmm.
did not wail at Becca's casket. you know,
Yes.
it was
Yeah.
just crazy knowing that our daughters are missing out on being an aunt.
Hmm.
Now this is another perspective thing God gave me, is Becca got to know one niece before she passed. And since then, there have been, four nieces and two nephews now. And, just the thought of that's another one of those bittersweet things. Becca will never be holding them. She'll never be able to be their aunt. They'll not know their Aunt Becca. But then I also have two or three grandchildren in heaven that were never born. They were a pregnancy loss. And the Lord reminded me, but Becca has nieces or nephews in heaven that you've never met.
Oh,
It was like, whoa.
wow. That is awesome. I love that. I love
Yes.
that. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, that was just one of those perspective things.
Hmm.
I know when you talked about this in your book, you said I had to push the thoughts of what could have been out of my mind so I could open myself up to the wonderful season of new life in our family. So we can't let the grief of what's missing and who's missing and what they are going to miss outweigh the beauty and the miracle of life and the continuing seasons of change, can we?
Mm-mm. That's for sure. Because if we're holding too tight and our eyes are always backward, then it almost compounds our grief. It compounds the loss because we're not only losing what we had before, but we're losing today. And
Yes.
the Lord definitely doesn't want that for us. But I don't believe our loved ones, I think our kids would be, Becca and Nicole would be like, Mom, stop.
Yeah,
We're here. It's
exactly.
okay. Keep going. Those kind of things.
Yeah, exactly. I think so too. Now, May is your most difficult month, along with December, obviously.
Hmm.
Birthdays, Mother's Day, you've mentioned some of these things. Is there anything specific that you can share with us that you have done to help yourself get through those difficult days? Maybe especially when those around you don't want to acknowledge those, or, for you, it's been so long, people don't remember those days. They don't even think about that this must be hard on you. How do you get through some of those?
May is probably is one of the most difficult because again, Mother's Day, Nicole's birthday. I lost my own mom in May, on May 11th, and
Mm,
so those May is, I kind of think about it as the grieving month. But
mm,
on the opposite side of that, we're blessed because May is when it's spring and it's,
yes.
new life is coming out.
Mm,
You can see it visually outside. And those kind of things really help me during this month to be outside, to plant plants, to have my hands in the dirt, to go for walks. I think those kind of things are really important if we're able to get outside and do those kind of things because it kind of opens our perspective. So I think for me, especially being outside. Now, December is harder because it
Right.
is Christmas and it's cold and you don't go out as much. But I think there's also things that we can do during the cold months or the hard months like that to help. One of those things is looking outside ourselves, especially as time has passed. Maybe go visit somebody that is struggling. Do something in your child's, okay, what would my child want me to do if they were here? How can I help that person? Those
Mm-hmm.
kind of things really help me, because if we're looking outside of our pain, then we can't look too much inside of our hearts. We don't get stuck inside of the pain.
Right.
So those kind of things, it's to be able to and make sure we listen and watch things that are good for our spirits. There's
Right.
so much negativity
Yes.
out there. We have to be really careful, especially when we're in, it's kind of like when you're sick, you want to eat healthy things. You want to make
Mm-hmm.
sure you're not eating a lot of junk food. Our spirits are the same. So when our spirits are kind of struggling, it's important to, put on music that's edifying or,
Mm-hmm.
positive. Listen to podcasts or books that are going to bring you up.
Right.
Those kind of things are really, really important.
Not
So,
things that'll make you feel more hopeless than you already feel.
right, because there's plenty of
Oh,
that.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
those things do tend to scream louder than the positive. So
Mm-hmm.
I think it's very, very important. Get
And
outside
it's
if you
easy
can.
to gravitate towards those darker things. When we feel
It
that darkness, it's like a magnet that just pulls us to more darkness, and that's
mhm.
dangerous.
It is dangerous, and that's 100% correct. We do tend to draw. If we're falling into the pit, we almost want to grab those rocks that will pull us into the pit even further.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really important that you fight that, and that we continue to go, no, we're not going to give into that. We're going to, yes, acknowledge our pain, acknowledge that this hurts, acknowledge the bitter, like you said, but also go, okay, now I'm going to go and grab the sweet, because there's always something to be grateful for. There's always something to look outside of ourselves and go, okay, there's beauty out here, to have that eternal perspective. So
Yes.
I think those are really important. If you can get outside, listen to good things, watch good things, make sure that we're careful with our spirits.
Yes. Yeah. What we're feeding our souls. Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And I like what you said about the spring, getting outside and reminding ourselves of the new life that comes in every year. Because
Mm-hmm.
I think it almost seems like there are some things that before you lose a child, but then after you lose a child, things take on a whole new meaning in some
Yes.
ways. And like the whole spring always follows winter.
Mm-hmm.
Spring always follows the deadness of winter. There is
Mm-hmm.
always new life. Some years it may take longer to come in and to see it,
Mm-hmm.
but I think it is I like what you said about in the spring, especially if May is a hard month for you. Get outside and acknowledge the new life that's happening all around you.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't mean that this year you're going to come out of that dark pit and walk like Kim and I are. I mean, it's taken us years to get to where
Mm-hmm.
we are. But just that reminder that God is faithful.
Mm-hmm.
God is faithful, and he will bring life from death. And I'm talking about our own death, because we feel like we died when our child died.
Mm-hmm.
And he will bring us back to life, just like we can visually see spring coming. Spring will come back into your life at some point.
Mm-hmm.
So,
And what you said is so true, that we do have to shift our eyes to see the spring, to look
yes.
for spring, because grief, it makes us feel like we're in this perpetual winter.
Hmm.
But if we don't embrace the spring, which means looking out to that new life that God has for us, and being able to acknowledge, okay, you said spring always comes after winter, and it does. And the seasons of our life, there will be a spring in our souls.
Hmm.
It may not feel, you may just get a little leaf, you may just get a little
Right.
tiny bloom this year, and that's okay.
Hmm.
And look at that, grab that, whatever that looks like for you. I think that that's important, to just allow your eyes to look upward and outward.
Yes. Yes. Well, Kim, I want to wrap this up by talking about a scripture that God has spoken to both of us about, which is Ephesians 5:20, that says that God can do abundantly more than we could even imagine. And I know, kind of like we've been talking, we can't imagine getting out of this suffocating darkness when our child dies. We cannot imagine surviving it, much less living for another 10, 20, 30, 40 years again and having a fulfilling life. But God can. God can imagine that. God can see it. God, he can see what we can't see. He can imagine what we can't imagine. It was funny when I was reading your book, you talked about Kintsugi, I think is how you say it.
Yes.
And I've written about this a few times. It's in my new book, Reflections of Hope. And I even talked about this a couple of weeks ago on the podcast. And then I read it about how you shared about it in your book.
Yeah.
So it's like kindred spirit here.
Yes, for sure.
It doesn't mean that our life is great with no more grief. Well, first of all, let's explain what the kintsugi is. It's Japanese, something has been shattered, a vase, a cup, something, and they put the pieces back together and they glue it and they put in this gold or silver or platinum, like a filigree or a dusting, and that becomes the cracks and it becomes a work of beauty.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yes.
this shattered thing becomes valuable and beautiful because of how it's been put back together. And that's what gives it the beauty, is how it was put back together.
Mm-hmm.
Anything you want to add to that?
Oh, I think Kintsugi is such a awesome example of God's healing work in our lives. And just like you explained it, your eyes then are drawn to the broken parts instead of a whole piece. And the whole piece, the brokenness is accentuated. And that's how God's work in us is accentuated when your eyes are drawn to that. And the piece actually becomes stronger than it was before it was broken. So I think it's such a wonderful
and
example.
there's a beauty there that wasn't there before.
Yes, yes. It's one of those wonderful examples of how you see just kind of a plain, vase before, but then when you see it with Kintsugi, it's like, oh my goodness, you can see all of the cracks, all of these things that actually bring out the beauty in the piece.
Yes.
So I love that.
It's like it draws your eyes to the brokenness
Yes.
and the beauty of the brokenness.
Yes, it's so true.
It just does. So if you haven't seen it, look it up. It's Kintsugi. So
Yes.
look up, Google it, whatever, and find some pictures of it to see what we're talking about. Now, it's interesting. I was talking about this yesterday with someone. A lot of times we feel like it's our pain that keeps us attached to our child, but it's not. It's our love that keeps us connected to them. So that means that the pain is still there. So it's kind of like this kintsugi. We're always going to have that undercurrent of pain or the cracks underneath the gold or the love, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes. It becomes a part of us, and it is always there. And like you talked about a little while ago, when we think of healing, we think of being back to the way we were before. But grief does something different in us. It does bring a clarity, and it brings a beauty like the Kintsugi, where we are not going to be the way we were before, because now our cracks, our pain, it becomes a part of us. But it just adds another layer or dimension to our lives here. It adds a deeper meaning to, and a connection to our lives here, to a connection to eternity, really.
Yes, definitely. Definitely. Well, it is time to end our talk. I knew we'd go a ways.
Yeah.
So before we do, can you tell us about your book, Kim, Victorious Heart, Finding Hope and Healing After a Devastating Loss?
This book is born out of not just our story, but I really had a passion to let other grievers, bereavers, like you call them, which is a wonderful term, to just know that they're not alone. You are not alone in your grief, and you are going to make it. And I think that that's really important for us to each realize as we're walking through sorrow. It's just basically a guidebook. Not that everyone grieves the same, because we all grieve differently, but it's things that helped our family. It's also got helpful hints for people who are walking alongside you in grief.
Yes.
To things that people did for us that were really helpful and helped us along through that grief. And you can get it on my website. There's a link on my website, wildvictoriousheart.com. It's also available on Amazon or wherever books are sold.
Mm-hmm. Now, how did you come up with that title?
Oh,
I
I'm
know,
so
but
glad
you
you
got to
asked.
share that. You've got to share
Oh,
that.
I'm so glad you asked that. A few weeks after Nicole went to heaven, a friend of mine gave us a bookmark with Nicole's name on it, and the meaning of her name. And the meaning of her name is Victorious Heart. And so later, I thought, what a perfect phrase to describe our girl. She lived with a victorious heart. And so the Lord planted a little seed in me to help me to get through life, to be victorious and to have a victorious heart. So it was one of those things I felt like this is the perfect name because we can survive grief with a victorious heart. So
Yes.
that's where that name came from.
Yeah. And it's helpful when, Christians who have never lost a child will tell us that, and you just blow that off. You have no idea what you're talking about. But when someone who's been without their child for almost 12 years and, 25 years can say that, you can absorb that.
Mm-hmm.
You may not feel like it right now, but you can and you will have a victorious heart. At some point you will get there. And I highly recommend this book, guys. I'll say it's one of the best books. I'd say I'd put it in the top 5 that I have
Thank
read
you.
for parents who've lost a child. It is really good. And we just happen to have the same publisher, Morgan
Yes.
James. So,
Yes.
which is actually how I came across you, because they send out emails of the new books that come out, and I saw yours and wrote, it's like, oh, I've got to read this
Yes.
one, got to get a hold of
Yes.
her. And so, Kim, so you said they can find the book on your website. Can you tell us what that is? How can people connect with you?
Sure. It's wildvictoriousheart.com. And I have a blog and different links on there. There is a link to get the book, and also you can get it on Amazon as well. And you can contact me through my website as well. I try to get back and respond fairly quickly to anyone who, if you have questions or any comments you need, you just feel like you need encouragement or help, please reach
Yes.
out.
Yeah. And I'll put a link to that in the show notes as well. So, Kim, do you have any last thoughts that you want to share with us?
I just want to say this month of May is hard,
Yes.
and that's okay. And we may just feel like we want to just crawl under a rock during this month, but I just encourage you to know that you're going to make it through the month of May, and to be able to walk through these hard days like Mother's Day, weddings, graduation. You're going to make it. And regarding Mother's Day, you're still a mama. If your
Yes.
baby's not with you, whatever age, you're still a mama to that child, to that person, and you always will be.
Yes. All right. Well, thank you so much, Kim, for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. It was just wonderful to visit with you.
And I'm sure the listeners will be anxious to have you back on to talk about some other important topics. So we'll look forward to that.
Thank you.
If you're like me, I could just talk to and glean from Kim for much longer than the time we had here today. And I am really looking forward to having her back on to discuss more topics. Okay, there have been some issues with my new book, Reflections of Hope, that I want to mention. Now, I was not planning to talk about my book again this week, but I feel like I can reach more of you here about what's going on than anywhere else with this book. So as of my recording of this, we have taken Amazon off of our webpage as a place to purchase this book. Amazon has not even completed the shipment of the books that were pre-ordered. And not only are they out of stock, but they are not even showing it as out of stock, and they're not even allowing anyone to order the book right now. I called Amazon to talk to someone about this, and no one could give me any answers, including if they have even placed an order from the publisher, from the printer, to have them in stock again at some point. Now, Dave ordered from our printer, and within 24 hours, they were printing a book to send it out. So I am not sure why Amazon is not carrying my book. They show it. They're not allowing people to order it, and no one will even tell me if they are going to restock it and when, if they have anything ordered. So anyway, if you're one of them that has pre-ordered the book and not received it from Amazon, I really encourage you to cancel your order there. And you can get it from somewhere like Books A Million, also called BAM. Walmart has it for order, Barnes and Noble, and you can get it from us. Dave went ahead and put it on our website. We weren't going to do that because it's a big book and the shipping costs and other things, but he did put it on our website. You can order it from us, and we will ship it to you directly from the printer. So those are your choices, okay? And, like I said, that's as of this recording. Amazon might have it again. I don't know, but just letting you know what's going on with that. It's a bit frustrating. So what I really wanted to share with you today is just to let you know of something that is in the works for next summer of 2024. At that point, GPS Hope will be 10 years old. It started in our house as a little life group from our church, and I had to come up with a name. Our church that we were attending asked if we would start some sort of a home group for parents who've lost a child, and I came up with the name, and God gave me GPS Hope, Grieving Parents Sharing Hope, thinking it was just for this little group in our house and having no idea that it would grow to be what it is today. So that started 10 years ago. And we want to celebrate by having an event here in Wisconsin. It's probably going to be in July or August. I think we're leaning towards August at this point. And it will be a combination of a conference for bereavers. If you have come to one of our GPS Hope and Healing retreats, it will be like a reunion. I know a lot of you talk about that. And then we're also going to have a big event on that Saturday night for anyone who has supported this ministry and just wants to celebrate with us. So we're super excited about this. Keep your eyes and ears open for the details for when we get the date set. And I really am hoping to have that in place by the end of this month. Let's go ahead with our birthday segment. Jordan Slusher was born on May 17th and is forever 21. Jason Turner was born on May 20th and is forever 36. As always, we celebrate the day these two came into the world with their families. We know it will always be a special and an important day in their lives. If you would like to have your child's birthday announced the week of his or her birthday, I would be honored to do that. All you have to do is go to gpshope.org/birthdays. Fill out that form, including the pronunciation, please, so that I say your child's name correctly. If it's a name that sometimes gets mispronounced, the first or the last name. And I will share with our listeners your child's birthday that week. Dave will also send you an email to remind you to listen to the podcast that week. I know this is such a painful time of year for many of us. Like Kim said, it may not seem like it, and you may not know how, but you will get through it. You still have a life to live, and it can and will have meaning and purpose again, not in spite of your child's death, but because of his or her life, just like the Kintsugi we talked about. And I encourage you, look up pictures of this pottery. We had our local share and care group meeting last night, and we talked about this Kintsugi. And when we pulled up our smartphones and started looking at pictures, every single person went, wow. So look it up. See the beauty in what is broken. And then realize you can have that same beauty for yourself. If you don't have your own hope for that, hold on to our hope for you. And remember to hold on. Pain eases. There is hope.